Well, ladies and gentlemen, Dean Trevor Morrison, Professor Sujit Chaudhry, I'm really very, very pleased to be here. I feel at home because you have heard that I have been for more than 20 years Professor of Public Health, and really I feel more at home in a university like this than in a presidential palace, where I still feel strange and a foreigner, you know. First of all, thank you for being here. It's an honor for me to be with you. And it's also, I feel it's a good opportunity to talk about the Arab Spring and about Tunisia in one of the most prominent universities in the world. I'm glad to have this chance to clarify before this distinguished assembly of scholars and students what is taking place in Tunisia today and in the Arab world. Because I must confess that the prompt shift in the discourse of international observer from a romantic enthusiasm to dark disappointment is quite mystifying. Gloomy predictions about the failure of the Arab Spring now re-labeled the Islamist winter, and lamentation about the current chaos in the whole region seem to have replaced nuanced analysis. What I want to do today is to give you a few elements that will allow to make a more balanced assessment of the present situation. To begin with, I want to stress the diversity of situations that have emerged from the Arab Spring. The revolution that took place in the Arab world is a political, social, and psychological revolution. It's a social transmutation, the objective of which is the redistribution of what I call the three main social forces, the 3P: power, prosperity, and pride. One should refrain, however, from too hastily comparing situations in Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, and Syria. Each country requires an adapted and distinct assessment. It's also essential to situate the current revolution in the perspective of other and former revolution. This is not the first revolution in the world and probably will not be the last. I don't know whether a historian knows how many revolutions we have had from the beginning of the history, but I remember I read somewhere that the first revolution was in Egypt 3,000 years before Christ. So you see that it's an old issue. And I'm not sure that we're not going to face revolution in the future. So we have to, this is why it's important to situate the current revolution in the perspective of other and former revolution. In order to do so, we can consider what I call the 4 laws of revolution. Number 1, all revolution came with a price. And the price that has paid in Tunisia is about 380 martyrs. 2 of them have been assassinated lately, Martyr Shukri Belaid and Martyr Mohammed Brahmi, also are part of this heavy price. But when you compare this price to the price paid by Libya, by Egypt, and especially by Syria, Tunisia didn't pay a very, very important price, but you have to pay a price for a revolution. Number 2, those who initiated the revolution do not always benefit from it. This is the most terrible law, probably, because, in Tunisia, the people who died for the revolution, and they came, all of them, from the inland areas, from the poorest area, from the poorest suburb, and they are still waiting for the benefit of this revolution. They are still waiting for, of course, they got democracy, of course, they got freedom of expression, of course, etc., but they didn't get jobs, and this is the most important thing for them. And they still see corruption going on even after a revolution. So it's terrible to say that this terrible law, those who initiated the revolution do not always benefit from it. This is the main problem. The third law is all revolution give birth to a counter-revolution. This is also an important law. Everywhere, when you have a revolution, you have a counter-revolution, and you have to deal with this counter-revolution. How could you deal with it peacefully or by cutting heads? This would be also part of the price you have to pay for a revolution. Number 4, not all revolutions succeed, and most require a lot of time before they achieve some of their goals. This is why when I heard that the Arab Spring is over, it's already failed, etc. How do you know it? How do you know it? You have to wait sometimes decades before having the right to say this revolution has failed. All revolutions require a lot of time before they achieve some of the goals. One could perhaps mention the United States as an example of this, where the immediate benefits of independence were not enjoyed by all. The Chi's rebellion was organized by veterans from the American Revolutionary War. All of these 4 laws manifest themselves in the current process that are taking place in the Arab world and in Tunisia. The revolution did come with a high price, as I told you, in terms of stability and economic prosperity. The economy is blocked due to the absence of investment from inside and from the outside world. Because investors are waiting for the return of the definitive stability, we are drawing upon our reserves. Terrorism remains a constant threat and a source of instability. Other events taking place in Mali, Libya, and Syria have become a matter of Tunisian domestic politics. Because Tunisia is not an island, Tunisia is linked to the whole region, and we are living in the most dangerous region in the world. So the terrorism we are suffering from is imported from Syria, is imported from Libya, is imported from Mali, and we have to deal with this threat, not only with the domestic terrorism itself. The revolution did not achieve its promised benefits, I must admit, and it gave birth to a strong counter-revolutionary movement. One of the key objectives of the revolution was the independence of the justice system. Concretely, this entails that judges who were formerly compliant with the ways of the former regime began to act as if they were independent from the state institution, whereas in reality they are overly dependent upon opposition party, including those of the former regime. This was quite surprising for us. We thought that fighting for an independent judiciary would mean that we would have, judges independent from the state, but now we know that they are independent from the state, from the regime, but not independent from the political parties. And this is also a new challenge for having a real democracy. The revolution brought about a free press, which is now being polluted by individuals involved in the former regime who confuse rumors with information and conspiracy with analysis. Like in many countries, the transparency and fairness of election is placed into jeopardy by the question of financing the political parties, media manipulation, and the competition among regions. One of the main tasks for Tunisia today is to find a way to keep up with these rights, free press and independent justice, and the free and fair elections, while containing their preventing effects. So will the revolution succeed? How much time it will take before it achieves its goals? One thing we know is that the revolution has brought about a demand for democracy. Although the ongoing crisis and threats have increased the general sense of anxiety, this demand is still very much alive. Contrary to what some commentators have alleged, the fear of democracy has not translated into a desire for the return of dictatorship. What we do not know, however, is whether the institution and rights established by democracy will lead to the triumph of the counter-revolution and the return of the former regime. Tunisia is today at crossroads. In addition to all obstacles it faces, it also disposes of a number of decisive instruments which may aid it in overcoming these obstacles. Dialogue have never stopped between the government and opposition party and amongst opposition party. This had prevented the forces of counter-revolution, whose main goal is to increase the political polarization, from enjoying success. Institutions remain strong, despite the repeated attacks and attempts at weakening them. The army is legalist, disciplined, and respectful of state institutions. Civil society is organized, but has strongly rejected violent form of mobilization. Women are more empowered than before. The number of women in political parties and in the government has increased, though it's still insufficient. Violence and assault against women no longer go unpunished. as was shown by the remarkable mobilization of Tunisian society against the two policemen who assaulted a woman in the September 2012. After numerous months of intense and lively disputes in the Assembly, parties have now reached an agreement on the articles fully guaranteeing gender equality. For all these reasons, I like to compare the process Tunisia has followed thus far to the image of a troop that is dancing by the cliff. Fear of chaos has been constant since December 2010. Obstacles have been and remain numerous, and yet Tunisians have collectively created a unique pathway whereby consensus and peace ultimately prevail. Before I conclude, let me say a few words concerning a project that is dear to me and you have heard about. I mean the International Constitutional Court. This court would have the power and legitimacy to invalidate elections and to determine whether national constitution guarantees the freedoms and rights acknowledged by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. If it does so, the regime can be declared illegal and cannot be recognized by the United Nations. This is the main idea. Let's now consider the case of Bashar al-Assad, who on June 20, 2000, received the presidency of the Syrian Republic as an inheritance present from his father. Let's suppose that this case is presented before the International Constitutional Court and that the court has declared this presidency illegitimate. Maybe we wouldn't count 100,000 deaths and 7 million displaced persons. And maybe we wouldn't have another powder keg in the Middle East. My dream is that one day an international constitutional court can be created and that it can prevent such catastrophe from taking place. A group of Tunisians, legal scholars and judges have been working to define the ways to implement such a project in the past couple of years. And it has already gained the positive attention of many legal experts in the international community. It's not a coincidence that this project was born in an Arab country. Arab countries know all too well what dictatorship is, what enduring threat it represents, and why it's urgent to fight it by all means. As I tried to show you, the narrative is not about Arabs, or the narrative is not about whether Arabs are ready for democracy and it's not about, it's mainly about revolution. It's the Arab Spring is just one revolution among many, many other revolutions, and this revolution is specific to the Arab world, that's right, but we have to solve the same problems everywhere, at every revolution. What to do with the counter-revolution? How can you lower the price, human lives and so forth? How can we achieve the objective of revolution? How, the level of expectation after revolution is extremely high. And you are quite sure that you are going to deceive people because people are waiting everything from you after revolution. And then you have to deal with this frustration. So we are experimenting the same problem all over the world after each revolution. It's the same thing about democracy. When I hear people talking about, well, are Arabs ready for democracy? Is democracy good for Arabs? And so forth. I always remember what Plato said 25 centuries ago, when Plato was saying, hey, be careful because democracy could lead to chaos and chaos could lead to dictatorship. He was not talking about Egypt. He was not talking about Arab country. He was talking about the problem of democracy everywhere and at any time. So I read an article by Walter Clements in the New York Times I think 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago, and he reminded us that democracy, it's the same problem all over the world, and that Plato and all the other writers, prevented us centuries ago that democracy is not an easy task, and implementing democracy in any country, in any culture, is extremely difficult. And this is what we are discovering now in the Arab country, that dealing with democracy is not an easy task. I told you about how frustrated I felt when I saw that we fought for more than 20 years for freedom of expression, and now we are the principal victims of this freedom of expression, because now we have this freedom of press sometimes going too far and sometimes manipulated by the counter-revolution. I have been myself confronted with the judiciary system. I had 6 or 7 trials, and now we have to face the same judges, you know, feeling that they are so confident in themselves that they will be now part of the opposition. So when you know that also a lot of money could be put on political parties, and that the fair elections you are expecting wouldn't be as fair as you want, because there are a lot of money coming from outside the country. So you have to reflect about how difficult it is to implement democracies. Probably you remember that in 1933, when extremist right Nazi was elected in Germany, he was elected within a democratic system and by uneducated people. So you can imagine that the same situation you can have the same situation in Arab countries. So once again, you see that the problem is not the main problem is how to implement democracy in our countries. Democracy is facing the same problem, the same difficulties everywhere. And we Arabs, we have to deal with this problem. We are discovering how difficult it is to implement democracy, and we have to find some solution. Otherwise, we could also make a lot of mistakes, and we can return to what Plato was afraid of, the rule of the strong man and the rule of the new dictatorship. So I am quite... democracy is a constant work in progress. It's a challenge. It's a continual process of experimentation. And today, the Arab world is one of the major sites of experimentation of this type of political regime. Tunisia is, in particular, is in the process of developing its own experimentation, one that will possibly lead to a new solution and method and could be useful to other countries. This is what I hope. This is what we hope. This is what we are trying to do. And the driving power of the principle of consensus and dialogue over the months, and in spite of all the crises, has afforded to the Tunisian transition process its originality and hopefully, ultimately, its success. In the meantime, we have no other choice than continuing to struggle to achieve this objective. As the poet Mahado once said, the road does not exist. There is only the walking, and we are walking. Thank you.
Excellency, thank you. Those were very interesting and moving remarks. And thank you for taking a couple of questions from Professor Chowdhury and me. Let me start. About a year ago, you were here in this country and speaking to the Council on Foreign Relations. And at that time, I think you said that your position was that you were optimistic about the transition to democracy, or the potential for transition to democracy, not just in Tunisia, but in Egypt and Libya as well. And since then, of course, the situation has changed rather dramatically in both Egypt and Libya. So I'm wondering, first of all, how you would assess the situation in those two countries today, and if democracy has failed or is in the process of failing in those countries, was the failure inevitable, or could it have been avoided? And either way, why has Tunisia fared better than its neighbors?
Well, you said that last year I was optimistic. Now I would say that I am pessi-optimistic. Yes, I am pretty optimistic because, you know, I never imagined that the aftermath of a revolution could be so complex, so dangerous, and so subtle and so difficult, you know. And it's true that a revolution is quite easy, but dealing with the aftermath of a revolution is another problem. Well, I'm not going to talk about Egypt and Libya because, unfortunately, I am not just a professor. I am also head of state, and I'm afraid to have political problems tomorrow. So I'll be very, very careful, and I will talk only about Tunisia.
I think that's wise.
You understand?
It's a good idea.
So, why the Tunisia is different? Because Tunisia is different because Tunisia is, middle class society. We have a small population, 10 millions. I can't say well-educated population. We are very, very close to Europe. We have extremely dense relationship with Europe, with France. All the elite lived in France. Even the opposition, the Islamist opposition, spent more than 20 years in England. This is why they love the parliamentary regime. You know, they want to have the parliamentary regime in Tunisia just because they lived in Great Britain. So, the influence of Europe is extremely important in Tunisia, just because we are very close to Europe, you know, and also because we have a strong civil society, and this is quite different. I said I'm not going to talk about other countries, but I must. I don't. For instance, you know, under the dictatorship on the Gaddafi, it was extremely difficult to have any kind of NGOs in Libya. But in Tunisia, even under the dictatorship of Ben Ali, we used to have a very, very solid and very, very important civil society. The status of women also is important because you probably know that in Tunisia, since the independence, women are empowered. Women have played an important role in defending democracy and promoting human rights during the 80s and the 90s. So, and also because there is another difference also. We have a small military, never involved in politics, professional and disciplined. All these differences makes that the transition is easier. And also because Tunisia is a homogeneous society, you know. Tunisia is all Tunisian, 99% of Tunisians are Muslim, Sunni, Arabs, etc. While in other countries, even in Egypt, you have these huge differences between. So probably because of these differences, the transition is easier. But even in Tunisia, the transition is quite difficult because you have. Of course, it's a homogeneous society, but it's also a divided society. You have secularists and Islamists, and you have extreme secularists and extreme Islamists, and this is why the political discussion is quite tough. So let's summarize. Because of this very specific condition to the Tunisian population, the transition is easy, but even with that, the transition is also complex, subtle, and difficult. Now imagine how difficult it is when you have a society like in Syria, where you have a lot of religion. Imagine what the situation is where you have military involved in politics since half a century and so forth. So this is why as I told you, I'm optimistic because I thought that we are going to have our elections in December. Now we have to wait perhaps 6 months. I hope not. I hope that we will do it. But the situation is extremely complex. Look, we were very close to reach a consensus in July, and then we have this horrible assassination, political assassination, and the whole process was blocked. And also in February, last February, when we have this horrible assassination of the Shokri Belaid, also we were very close to have to reach the consensus. And every time we have this political assassination to stop the process. Who knows if we are not going to have such obstacles, because I think that there are a lot of people inside Tunisia and outside Tunisia who do not want the process to be achieved and to have, as I always say, it's our last hope. Tunisia is the last hope of the Arab Spring, and for many people inside and outside, this hope must not prevail. And this is, it's a difficult situation, but once again, we have to be optimistic. We have to be optimistic.
So my question really comes from your last set of remarks about these political assassinations that have been very challenging for the transition. And so it's the question I have is about the threat of Salafi extremism to the Tunisian transition. And so what kind of a threat does it pose? How big a threat is it? And also, how is that threat shaped by the regional context that Tunisia finds itself in, with turmoil and instability in Mali, in Libya, and as well with reports, I understand, of Tunisian jihadis now fighting in Syria on the side of Islamist forces, and what kind of instability they might introduce into Tunisia if they return back?
Well, in Tunisia, we are facing three challenges. The first is security. The second is economy, and the third, reaching the consensus and achieve the process, the political process. Now, on the agenda, the main danger for Tunisia, the main threat for Tunisia is the terrorist threat. And I must confess that we underestimate this threat. Because we thought that all Islamists in Tunisia are moderate, and that because we are Tunisian, because we are moderate people and so forth, we are going to have a moderate Islam. In fact, we have a moderate Islam. Nahda is, it's the most important part of the spectrum, and it's moderate part of the Islamist, it's a moderate Islamist movement. I would like to underline an important point. I always hear that Tunisia is governed by Islamists. That's untrue. Tunisia is governed by a coalition, and in this coalition you have a secular president of the republic, myself. You have a secular president of the Constituent Assembly, my colleague, Dr. Mustafa bin Jafar. And you have a government, and within this government, of course, we have the head of the government is an Islamist, moderate Islamist, but you have also independent and ministers from many political parties, two secular political parties. So it's not true to say that Tunisia is governed by Islamists. Tunisia is governed by a coalition. Within this coalition, you have Islamists, and it was very important for us to have this Islamist parties within the government, because otherwise you would have, the one Tunisia against one other. A secular Tunisia against a traditional Tunisia. This is what happened in other countries, and this is what we didn't want in Tunisia. We said we have to unite Tunisians, and the only way to unite Tunisians is to have the moderate Islamists on board. Try to convince them that democracy is useful for them and useful for us and useful for the whole country. And this is what happened. I think we succeeded in having the central part of the spectrum on board. But we forgot that there is the other, it's a tiny minority, within a tiny minority, but very, very active. 200 people or 300 people, can harm a country, can stop the whole process. And this is what happened. We underestimate the danger of those 300 or 400. I don't know exactly the number, but I know that I'm quite sure that they are not more than 1,000. But those 1,000 people, are extremely dangerous because, first of all, they don't believe in democracy. They believe that another party is a traitor, not only to the country, but a traitor to Islam. And they hate Nahda more than Nahda is hated by the extreme secularists, and for them, they are the enemies. And now they are training in Mali, they are training in Syria, training in Libya, and they are the principal threat that we are going to face. not only in matter of killing of a new political assassination, but in matter of being able to block the whole political process. This is what happened twice. And this is why now it's, one of the most, I would say, strange thing for me, as I'm a physician, I always dealt with the human rights, and now I am thinking of, how to improve the capability of the military, of it's terrible for a peaceful man for me, like me, to think about security and to organize security, and all the time I'm dealing with this kind of question. But I think that it's the terrorist threat in Tunisia can be, we can have it under control. Mainly because, as I told you, it's a solid society, because it's one middle-class society, homogeneous society, solid and disciplined military and so forth. This threat is political threat, of course. It's also a threat for the reputation of Tunisia. Tunisia, we live on tourism. We have more than 5 million tourists every year. So just when you have just one killing and just one little bomb, I would say, and then it means that we will have 1 million tourists, lose. So it's a threat for the economy, it's a threat for the political process, but it cannot destabilize the state. It's not like in other countries. So we have to deal with it. It's a serious threat, but it's not that dangerous for the moment.
If you'll permit just one final question. I thought you spoke very poignantly about the dilemma that you're facing with the now independent judiciary,
yeah.
that recognizing the importance of an independent judiciary in a constitutional democracy as a check against the potential tyranny of the majority. You've achieved a judiciary that is now independent enough to act not as on your description in the interest of the country and the rule of law, but in the interest of political partisanship, effectively. And so how does one, Sajid's students here and our students in many contexts and many of us here think about what it would take to establish the building blocks of a workable constitutional democracy? So what has Tunisia learned about how to think about establishing an independent judiciary that works to help cement a workable constitutional democracy as opposed to subvert it?
Once again, I think it will take a long time because we don't have this. The problem is that we have inherited from the whole system, and within the whole system you have hundreds of judges, who have been part of the old regime. Some of them were corrupted. And we are dealing with the problem how to get rid of all these people without being accused of, threatening the independence of judiciary. We have to be very careful, case by case, and this is why it would take time. And when we are trying also to set up an independent system that the judges themselves, would resolve their problems. This would be extremely important. This is why I always say that the state must not intervene. Both we have to accept the side effects of this freedom of press. We have to accept that a lot of journalists are not good professionals, that they even corrupted, and we do know that a lot of them have been part of the old regime. All this we know. But I was told the government, be very careful. Let the system regulate itself. Let the professional. Of course, it will take time, but it's much more, I think, fruitful than to come and say, I'm going to regulate, I'm going to put this man in prison and so forth, because the side effects of this policy could be harmful for democracy. We have to accept a period of chaos, We have to be very patient. The same thing with the judiciary system. Otherwise, we can revert to dictatorship very easily. Everybody is a dictator in itself, so we have to be very, very careful with our own feeling, our way of doing.
Absolutely. Well, this has been just a tremendous session. President Marzouki, thank you again for joining us, and please join me in thanking him.